Now you finally look appropriate for the wedding," my daughter-in-law whispered as I stared at my reflection with half my silver hair missing. For a moment, I honestly thought I was still dreaming. The luxury suite at the Vineyard Crest Resort was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of wedding staff setting up downstairs. Morning lights spilled through the curtains, pale and golden across the white carpet. My hand trembled as I touched the side of my head again. Smooth skin, uneven strands, broken pieces of silver hair scattered across my pillow like ashes. I had spent 40 years growing that hair. My late husband used to call it moonlight silk whenever he brushed it for me on quiet Sunday evenings. When Chemo took his own hair before he passed, he once smiled at me from our hospital room and said, "Promise me you'll never cut yours. It's the prettiest thing in this family." And now half of it was gone. I slowly lifted my eyes toward the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked smaller somehow. Older. Exposed. Behind me, Vanessa stood calmly in the doorway wearing a champagne-colored satin robe with bride stitched across the pocket in gold thread. Her blonde curls were pinned perfectly already, not a strand out of place. She crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly, almost admiring her own work. "You've been making this wedding about yourself for months," she said lightly. "I figured this would help people focus on the actual bride." My throat tightened so badly I could barely swallow. "You cut my hair while I was sleeping?" I asked quietly. Vanessa gave a small shrug. "It grows back." Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic one. A satisfied smile. Like someone who had finally put another person in their place. I stared at her for several long seconds, waiting for anger to come. Waiting for myself to scream or cry or throw something across the room like women did in movies. But all I felt was cold. A deep, hollow kind of cold spreading through my chest. The door behind her suddenly opened wider, and my son Daniel stepped inside, already dressed in black tuxedo pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He stopped the second he saw me standing there. His face lost color immediately. "Mom," he breathed. His eyes moved from the hair on the pillow to the uneven patches on my head. "What happened?" Vanessa answered before I could speak. "She's overreacting," she said smoothly. "I was trying to trim it because she refused to book a stylist, and things got a little uneven." I turned slowly toward my son, waiting for him to say something. Waiting for outrage. Waiting for protection. Waiting for the little boy who once cried when I accidentally burned my hand making him grilled cheese sandwiches. But Daniel only rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Vanessa," he muttered softly. "What?" she snapped. "I'm trying to save this wedding from turning into another Eleanor Whitmore performance." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything she had done. Daniel looked at me again, but this time there was no anger in his eyes. Only exhaustion. "Mom," he said carefully, "can we please not ruin today over this?" Those words hurt far more than the hair on the floor. I felt something inside me quietly break apart. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, silent fracture. After everything I had done for him, after every tuition payment, every mortgage loan, every family dinner, every holiday I held together after his father died, my humiliation had become an inconvenience to him. Vanessa walked farther into the room and picked up one of the silver strands from the pillow between her fingers. "Honestly," she said with a little laugh, "maybe shorter hair is exactly what you needed." I looked at her reflection beside mine in the mirror. Young, polished, triumphant. Then I looked back at myself, at the frightened older woman clutching her robe closed with shaking hands. And suddenly, for the first time in months, I felt perfectly calm. Because in that exact moment, I realized something Vanessa did not understand yet. She thought she had taken my dignity from me. What she had actually done was remove the very last reason I had to keep protecting either of them. The bridal suite became strangely quiet after Daniel and Vanessa left. I could still hear distant music drifting up from the outdoor ceremony space below the vineyard terrace. Staff members rolled carts across marble floors somewhere down the hall. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed. The wedding was continuing exactly on schedule while I stood barefoot beside a bed covered in silver strands of my own hair. I slowly sat down at the edge of the mattress because my knees suddenly felt weak beneath me. On the nightstand beside the bed sat the handwritten speech I had spent 3 weeks preparing for Daniel. The thick cream-colored paper now looked almost ridiculous. Every sentence had been carefully written to honor the son I thought I still recognized. I picked up the pages and stared at the opening line. The greatest privilege of my life was becoming your mother. My vision blurred for a moment before I quietly folded the speech back together. Across the room, my navy blue mother of the groom dress hung beside the window. It was custom-tailored in San Francisco 2 months earlier. Elegant. Conservative. Daniel had insisted I wear blue because Vanessa thought silver would photograph too brightly. At the time, I apologized for upsetting her without even understanding what I had done wrong. Looking back now, I realized how long this had been happening. The small humiliations, the subtle corrections, the careful little ways Vanessa kept reducing me piece by piece while everyone around us pretended not to notice. I remembered Thanksgiving dinner last year when she laughed and told guests that older women should avoid fitted dresses because desperation ages people. I remembered Christmas morning when she quietly replaced the family ornament Daniel made for me in kindergarten because it did not match the aesthetic. Even the wedding itself had slowly become an exercise in removal. The mother-son dance disappeared from the schedule 3 weeks earlier because Vanessa claimed it interrupted the flow of the evening. Family photos were reduced to 15 minutes between champagne service and sunset portraits. At the rehearsal dinner, I noticed my seat had been moved from beside Daniel to the far end of the table near 2 distant cousins from Arizona I had never even met before. Every time something happened, Daniel had the same answer. She is stressed. She does not mean it that way. Please do not make this harder than it already is. I stood slowly and walked toward the bathroom mirror again. The damage looked even worse beneath the brighter vanity lights. Uneven patches exposed pale skin near my temple. Jagged strands hung awkwardly against my jawline. Vanessa had not simply trimmed my hair badly. She wanted me hidden, embarrassed, smaller. My phone buzzed softly against the marble counter. A text from Grace appeared on the screen. "Aunt Eleanor, are you okay?" I heard Vanessa screaming downstairs. I stared at the message for several seconds before typing back. "I am fine, sweetheart." Almost immediately, the phone rang. Grace's voice sounded breathless the second I answered. "I am coming upstairs right now." "No," I said gently. "Stay downstairs." There was a pause. She did something horrible, did she not? I closed my eyes. Grace had always been too perceptive for her own good. "It does not matter anymore," I said quietly. "Yes, it does," she whispered. "You have spent your whole life protecting this family." Her words settled heavily in my chest. Protecting this family. That was exactly what I had done ever since my husband Arthur passed away 6 years earlier. I protected Daniel from debt by paying off his student loans. I protected his future by helping with the down payment on his condo in Seattle. I protected his image by pretending Vanessa's comments never hurt me. I even protected this wedding itself. The Vineyard venue alone had cost more than $70,000. The flowers were imported from Oregon. The string quartet had been flown in from New York. Every beautiful detail downstairs existed because I quietly wrote checks whenever Vanessa demanded another upgrade. And standing there in that silent marble bathroom, I suddenly understood something with complete clarity. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They believed I would continue absorbing humiliation simply because I always had before. Grace spoke again softly through the phone. "What are you going to do?" I looked at myself. One last time in the mirror. Then I reached for the hotel room phone beside the sink and calmly dialed the front desk. "Hello," I said evenly when the receptionist answered. "I need the best stylist available in Napa Valley sent to my suite immediately. And please tell the hotel manager that Eleanor Whitmore would also like to review every wedding payment made this weekend before tonight's reception begins." The stylist arrived 40 minutes later carrying 2 black leather cases and the calm confidence of someone who had spent years fixing disasters without asking questions. Her name was Celeste Moreno, and she looked at my reflection only once before setting her bags quietly on the marble counter. She did not gasp. She did not pity me. For some reason, I appreciated that more than kindness. "May I?" she asked gently, reaching toward the uneven strands near my temple. I nodded. Her fingers moved carefully through what remained of my hair while I sat silently beneath the bright vanity lights. Outside the suite windows, guests were beginning to gather on the lawn below. Tiny figures moved between white rose arrangements and rows of ivory chairs overlooking the Vineyard Hills. The wedding ceremony was less than 2 hours away. Celeste stepped back after several moments and met my eyes in the mirror. "I can hide this with extensions if you want," she said softly. "But honestly," she paused, You have the bone structure for something stronger. Stronger. The word lingered strangely in my mind. I glanced down at my wedding bracelet, the one Arthur gave me on our 25th anniversary. White gold. Tiny sapphires. I had worn it every day since he died. Do whatever you think is best, I told her quietly. Celeste gave a small nod and began unpacking her tools. As she worked, silence filled the room in a strangely comforting way. No excuses. No manipulation. No one asking me to stay quiet for the sake of appearances. Just the soft sound of scissors, warm air from the dryer, and the distant hum of music downstairs. Halfway through the transformation, there was a knock at the suite door. Before I could answer, Grace slipped inside carrying a garment bag against her chest. The moment she saw me sitting in the chair, her eyes widened with tears. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor," she whispered. I expected sympathy, maybe anger. Instead, Grace slowly smiled. "You look beautiful." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Beautiful. My hair was now cropped short against my jawline in sleek silver layers that exposed my cheekbones and neck in a way I had never dared before. It was elegant, sharp, confident. The frightened older woman from earlier that morning was disappearing little by little beneath Celeste's careful hands. Grace placed the garment bag carefully on the bed. "I brought something," she said. "Your original reception outfit." I frowned slightly. Vanessa had personally chosen my navy blue gown months ago. Grace unzipped the bag slowly and revealed a perfectly tailored ivory silk pantsuit underneath. Simple, sophisticated, timeless. I stared at it in shock. "Daniel picked that out with you in San Francisco," Grace said quietly. "Vanessa changed it afterward without telling you." Something cold settled deeper inside my chest. Another small theft. Another quiet removal. Grace lowered her voice. "I heard Vanessa talking to the bridesmaids this morning before everything happened." Celeste continued styling silently beside me while Grace spoke. "She said after today nobody would ever look at you first again." For several seconds, nobody in the room said anything. I watched my reflection carefully instead. The new haircut framed my face differently now. Stronger somehow. More honest. For years, I had tried so hard to remain soft inside a family that slowly learned softness could be exploited. Grace sat carefully at the edge of the bed. "There is something else you need to know," she admitted hesitantly. "Last night Vanessa asked the hotel manager to remove your name from the reception welcome screen because she thought guests might assume you paid for the wedding." Celeste stopped moving for the first time all morning. Even she looked stunned, but I only let out a slow breath. Because the truth was, I had paid for almost everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the honeymoon villa in Tuscany. Daniel once promised he would repay me after making partner at his law firm, but eventually the subject simply disappeared. Like so many other things. Grace looked at me carefully. "What are you going to do?" she whispered again. I stood slowly from the chair and walked toward the mirror. The woman staring back at me no longer looked humiliated. She looked awake. Celeste handed me a pair of diamond earrings from the counter and smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people reveal themselves right before they lose access to you." I fastened the earrings carefully and reached for the ivory silk suit waiting on the bed. Then I picked up my phone and opened the banking app connected to the family trust Arthur and I created decades earlier. Daniel Whitmore had always believed that account belonged to his future. By the time this wedding ended, he was finally going to learn the difference between access and ownership. By the time I finished dressing, the wedding ceremony had already started downstairs beneath the white rose arch overlooking the Vineyard Hills. Through the suite windows, I could see guests seated in neat rows beneath the California sun while a violin drifted softly through the air. Everything looked perfect from a distance. Expensive, elegant, carefully staged. Exactly the kind of wedding Vanessa had spent 14 months building like a magazine cover. I fastened the final button on the ivory silk jacket and studied myself one last time in the mirror. The transformation was impossible to ignore. My silver hair now framed my face in sleek layers that made me look sharper, lighter somehow. Stronger. Celeste smiled from behind me while packing her styling tools. "Most women spend years trying to become invisible gracefully," she said quietly. "You do not strike me as one of those women anymore." I almost smiled at that. Grace walked beside me as we left the suite together and headed toward the private elevator leading down to the ceremony lawn. The hallway outside buzzed with wedding staff carrying trays of champagne and floral arrangements. Several people glanced toward me as we passed. Their expressions shifted almost immediately from polite recognition to visible surprise. Not pity, surprise. The elevator doors opened onto the lower terrace just as the ceremony music softened. Grace touched my arm gently. "They are exchanging vows already," she whispered. I nodded calmly and stepped onto the stone pathway overlooking the lawn. A warm Napa breeze moved softly through the vineyards carrying the scent of roses and lavender. At the far end of the aisle, Daniel stood beside Vanessa beneath the archway. He looked handsome in his black tuxedo. Though there was tension in his posture, I recognized immediately. He kept adjusting his cufflinks the way he always did when anxious. For one brief second, I saw the little boy he used to be. The 7-year-old who climbed into my bed after thunderstorms. The teenager who cried quietly in the hospital hallway after Arthur's cancer diagnosis. The young man who once promised me no woman would ever come between us. Then Vanessa noticed me standing near the terrace entrance. Her expression changed instantly. The smile on her face froze so sharply it almost looked painful. Her eyes moved slowly across the ivory suit, the diamond earrings, the silver hair she had tried to destroy only hours earlier. Around her, several guests turned to look as well. A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Even from across the lawn, I could see confusion flicker across Daniel's face before he fully recognized me. The officiant paused awkwardly mid-sentence. Vanessa recovered first. Of course she did. She leaned toward Daniel with a tight smile still fixed on her face, whispering something sharply against his ear. Daniel immediately glanced toward me again with visible panic. Not concern for me. Concern for the wedding. Concern for appearances. The same concern that had guided every one of his choices lately. Grace exhaled softly beside me. "She looks terrified," she whispered. But I did not feel victorious. Not yet. Mostly, I felt tired. Tired of shrinking myself to protect people who never protected me back. Tired of confusing silence with dignity. The ceremony resumed moments later, but Vanessa kept looking toward me every few seconds as if she no longer understood the room she had spent months controlling. Guests continued, staring as well, though not in the way she expected. The older women especially watched me carefully with expressions I recognized instantly. Recognition. Respect. One woman near the second row even smiled faintly at me before turning back toward the altar. And suddenly I understood what Vanessa failed to realize all along. Humiliation only works when the other person agrees to carry it. I remained near the terrace through the rest of the ceremony while the sun dipped lower across the vineyard hills. When Daniel finally kissed his bride, applause erupted across the lawn, but his eyes briefly searched the crowd until they landed on me again. I held his gaze calmly this time. No anger, no tears, just clarity. Because while everyone downstairs believed the wedding had gone exactly as planned, I already knew something they did not. Before leaving the bridal suite earlier that afternoon, I had called my attorney in San Francisco and instructed him to freeze every remaining transfer connected to the Whitmore Family Trust until further review, including the penthouse purchase Daniel and Vanessa planned to close on the following Monday. The reception began just after sunset inside the Vineyard Ballroom overlooking the hills. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above tables covered in white roses and candlelight, while servers moved gracefully between guests carrying champagne and tiny porcelain plates of appetizers. From the outside, it looked like the kind of wedding people saved on Pinterest boards for years. Perfect lighting, perfect flowers, perfect couple. I stood near the entrance for several quiet moments before walking farther into the room beside Grace. Conversations softened almost immediately as people noticed me, not because of pity anymore. Something else had shifted after the ceremony. I could feel it in the way guests looked at me now. Curious, respectful, even a little cautious. Vanessa stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale gold dresses, while photographers circled constantly around her. The second she saw me entering the reception space, her smile tightened. She recovered quickly, of course. She always did. "Eleanor," she said brightly as I approached, her voice sweet enough to fool strangers. "You look different." I smiled politely. "Thank you, Vanessa." Her eyes flicked toward my ivory silk suit again. I noticed then that she had changed outfits as well. A second wedding gown now. Sleek satin. Dramatic neckline. Everything about Vanessa was designed for attention. But for the first time since I had met her, Attention inside the room no longer belonged entirely to her. Daniel appeared moments later holding 2 champagne glasses. Relief washed across his face the second he saw us, speaking calmly. "There you are," he said quickly. "I have been looking everywhere for you." He kissed my cheek lightly before handing me a glass. The gesture felt rehearsed somehow, like damage control. "You missed cocktail hour," he added carefully. "I needed some time upstairs," I replied. Daniel nodded too fast. "Of course. Right." Vanessa slipped her arm through his immediately, almost possessively. "We are about to start speeches," she announced. The planner moved everything up because sunset photos took longer than expected. Her tone remained pleasant, but I noticed the warning beneath it. Stay predictable. Stay quiet. Stay manageable. A server passed carrying silver trays of champagne, and I watched Vanessa subtly lean closer to Daniel. "Please make sure your mother keeps her remarks short," she whispered, not quietly enough. "We are already behind schedule." Daniel glanced at me awkwardly. "Mom," I looked at him steadily. "Do not worry," I said softly. "I have no intention of ruining your evening." Something about my calmness unsettled both of them more than anger would have. I could see it clearly now. Vanessa expected emotional reactions because emotional people could be dismissed. But silence forced people to think. Across the ballroom, guests slowly took their seats while soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Grace squeezed my hand gently before slipping away toward her table. I remained standing near the dance floor for another moment, watching Daniel and Vanessa move between guests like polished politicians shaking hands before an election. Beautiful. Charming. Empty. Then my phone vibrated softly inside my jacket pocket. A message from my attorney appeared on the screen. Trust modifications completed. Pending transfers suspended effective immediately. I read the message twice before locking the screen again. Calm settled over me in a way I had not felt for years. Not revenge exactly. Clarity. Nearby, I overheard 2 older women quietly speaking at one of the tables behind me. "That silver haircut transformed her," one whispered softly. "She carries herself differently now." The other nodded. "Some women become smaller after betrayal," she said. "Others become impossible to ignore." I turned away before they realized I heard them. At the front of the ballroom, the wedding planner tapped her microphone and welcomed everyone to the reception. Applause filled the room as Daniel and Vanessa walked onto the dance floor hand in hand for their first dance beneath the chandeliers. Guests smiled. Cameras flashed. Vanessa rested her head against Daniel's shoulder with practiced elegance, while he stared somewhere slightly beyond her. I wondered briefly if he already sensed something shifting beneath the surface of his carefully constructed future. Halfway through the song, his eyes lifted across the ballroom and found mine standing near the back of the room. I did not look away this time, and for the first time all day, Daniel's expression changed from anxiety to something far more dangerous. Uncertainty. Dinner service began shortly after the first dance ended. Servers moved elegantly through the ballroom carrying plates of filet mignon, roasted vegetables, and glasses of expensive Napa Valley wine, while soft jazz drifted beneath the low murmur of conversation. From my seat near the back corner of the room, I watched Daniel and Vanessa move from table to table greeting guests with polished smiles that looked increasingly strained the longer the evening continued. Vanessa especially could not stop glancing toward me. Every few minutes, her eyes would flick across the ballroom as if checking whether I remained predictable, whether I stayed quiet, whether I still occupied the small emotional space she assigned to me years ago. But something had changed after the ceremony. She felt it now even if she could not fully understand it yet. Grace leaned closer beside me while unfolding her napkin carefully across her lap. "She keeps asking the planner if you approved your speech with anyone beforehand," she whispered softly. I almost smiled at that. Vanessa had spent years controlling environments through anticipation. She studied people carefully, managed reactions, manipulated outcomes before conflict could even begin. What unsettled her most now was uncertainty. She no longer knew what I might do. Across the ballroom, Daniel raised his champagne glass during conversation with 2 senior partners from his law firm. His laughter sounded forced even from a distance. Every few moments, he adjusted the collar of his tuxedo as if it suddenly felt too tight against his neck. I remembered doing the same thing myself years earlier during Arthur's memorial service. Grief and panic often looked surprisingly similar in public. One of the servers approached our table carrying a silver tray with envelopes arranged neatly across the surface. Personal notes from the bride and groom. She explained politely while placing them beside each guest's plate. Grace opened hers immediately. Mine remained unopened for several moments before I finally slid one finger beneath the cream envelope flap. Inside was a printed thank you card with elegant gold lettering. Thank you for celebrating the beginning of our forever. Beneath the message, a smaller handwritten sentence appeared in Vanessa's familiar narrow script. Some things are more beautiful once they are cut away. I stared at the card silently while heat slowly rose beneath my skin. Grace noticed my expression immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. I handed her the card without speaking. The moment she read the handwritten note, her face hardened with visible anger. "She is unbelievable," she muttered under her breath. But strangely, I no longer felt wounded. Earlier that morning, the cruelty would have devastated me. Now it simply clarified things further. Vanessa was not losing control because of my haircut or my silence. She was losing control because she could no longer provoke the emotional collapse she expected from me. Across the ballroom, the wedding planner stepped onto the small stage near the dance floor and tapped gently against the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced warmly, "we are now moving into speeches before dessert service begins." Applause rippled politely through the room. Vanessa immediately straightened in her chair near the sweetheart table while Daniel reached for his champagne glass again. I noticed him glance toward me almost instinctively. Nervous now. Good. The best man gave his speech first. Harmless stories from college. Too many jokes about golf trips and expensive whiskey. Then Vanessa's maid of honor spoke tearfully about loyalty, friendship, and soulmates. The irony nearly made me laugh aloud. Finally, the planner smiled toward my table. "And now," she said brightly, "the groom's mother would like to say a few words." A hush settled softly across the ballroom as dozens of faces turned toward me at once. I rose slowly from my chair and smoothed one hand across the ivory silk jacket before walking toward the stage. The chandeliers reflected softly against wine glasses and polished silverware while guests watched me carefully. Vanessa's smile looked frozen now. Daniel did not smile at all. He looked frightened, truly frightened for the first time all day. As I reached the microphone, I carefully unfolded the speech I had written weeks earlier for the son I thought still existed. Then I looked down at the pages for several long seconds before calmly folding them back together again. Because somewhere between the hair on my pillow and the silence in my son's eyes, I had realized that speech belonged to a different family entirely. I stood quietly at the microphone while the ballroom waited. Candlelight flickered against crystal glasses and polished silverware as more than 200 guests watched me from their tables beneath the chandeliers. Somewhere near the back of the room, a wine glass clinked softly against a plate before silence settled again. Vanessa sat perfectly still beside Daniel at the sweetheart table, though I noticed one nervous hand gripping the stem of her champagne flute too tightly. Daniel looked pale now. Not angry, not defensive, just deeply uncertain in a way I had not seen since he was a child. I unfolded the speech in my hands slowly, glancing down at the familiar pages one final time. Every line had been written for a son I believed still valued kindness. A son who would have protected me this morning instead of asking me not to embarrass him. After several long seconds, I carefully folded the pages again and placed them beside the microphone untouched. A small ripple of confusion moved quietly through the room. Then I smiled gently. "I spent weeks writing a speech for tonight," I began calmly. "But somewhere between this morning and now, I realized those words no longer belonged to me." The ballroom remained silent. Even the servers near the kitchen entrance had stopped moving. "When my husband Arthur and I built our family," I continued softly, "we believed love looked like sacrifice. We believed protecting the people you love was the highest responsibility a person could carry." I paused briefly, letting my eyes drift toward Daniel. And for many years, I was proud to carry that responsibility. Daniel lowered his gaze immediately. Vanessa remained motionless beside him, though her smile had completely disappeared now. "I paid for this beautiful wedding because I wanted my son to begin his marriage without stress or financial pressure," I said. "The venue, the flowers, the honeymoon in Tuscany, even the penthouse you plan to move into next month." A visible murmur spread through the ballroom this time. Several guests turned toward Daniel and Vanessa with surprised expressions. I noticed one of Daniel's law partners slowly lowering his wine glass. Vanessa finally shifted uncomfortably in her chair. But today taught me something important. I continued, still calm. Generosity without respect eventually becomes permission for cruelty. The room felt completely still now. No music, no silverware, nothing except my voice moving quietly through the chandeliers overhead. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the folded thank you card Vanessa left at my table earlier that evening. "Hey, few hours ago," I said softly. "Someone reminded me that some things become more beautiful once they are cut away." Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Across the room, Grace stared openly at her now. At first, I thought those words were meant to humiliate me, I admitted. But I think they revealed something much more important. I looked directly toward Vanessa for the first time all evening. Sometimes removing what hurts you is exactly how healing begins. The silence that followed felt enormous. Daniel finally stood halfway from his chair. "Mom," he said quietly, panic rising beneath his voice. But I raised one gentle hand, and he stopped speaking immediately, just like he used to when he was little. "Before tonight began," I continued calmly, "I instructed my attorney to suspend all future financial transfers connected to the Whitmore family trust until further review." Gasps moved audibly across the ballroom now. Vanessa stared at me as if she genuinely could not process what she had just heard. "That includes the penthouse closing scheduled for Monday morning," I added softly. Daniel's face went completely white. Vanessa stood abruptly beside him. "You cannot do that," she snapped before catching herself too late. Every guest in the room heard it. I looked at her quietly. "Actually," I replied, "I can." The ballroom remained frozen in silence, while Vanessa slowly realized the truth unfolding around her. This was never about money alone. It was about access. Access to comfort. Access to influence. Access to the woman she believed would tolerate humiliation forever simply to remain included in her son's life. But the older I became, the more I understood something my husband once told me years ago after a difficult business betrayal. He said, "The most dangerous person in any room is the one who finally has nothing left to protect." I picked up the untouched speech from the podium and folded it carefully into my purse. Then I smiled gently at the stunned guests surrounding us. "I truly hope tonight becomes the beginning of a beautiful marriage," I said softly. "But for me, it is the end of pretending disrespect is the price of family." For several long seconds after I stepped away from the microphone, nobody in the ballroom moved. The chandeliers continued glowing softly overhead, while candlelight flickered across stunned faces frozen somewhere between discomfort and disbelief. Vanessa remained standing beside the sweetheart table, one hand gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned pale beneath the diamonds on her wrist. Daniel looked even worse. He stared at me like someone trying desperately to recognize a language he used to understand fluently, but no longer spoke. Then the whispers began. Quiet at first, a few guests leaning toward each other, chairs shifting softly against polished floors. One of the older men from Daniel's law firm slowly cleared his throat and reached for his wine glass again, without taking his eyes off the sweetheart table. Vanessa recovered before Daniel did. Of course she did. She straightened her shoulders immediately and forced a tight smile back onto her face before stepping toward the microphone. "Well," she laughed lightly, though the sound cracked around the edges, "families are certainly emotional sometimes." A few uncomfortable chuckles scattered weakly through the room. She glanced toward me briefly, searching for weakness she could still use somehow. "But tonight is about love," she continued quickly, "and new beginnings." The problem was, nobody was listening to her anymore. The room had shifted. Not dramatically, quietly. People saw her differently now because they had finally witnessed something she could not fully control. Desperation. Daniel stood slowly beside her and reached for the microphone next. "I think maybe everyone should enjoy dessert," he said awkwardly. "Mom and I can talk privately later." Mom and I. Not Vanessa and I. Not we. I noticed the distinction immediately. Vanessa noticed it too. Her eyes snapped toward him for half a second before the polished smile returned again. But tiny fractures had already started appearing beneath the surface of their perfect evening. I picked up my champagne glass calmly and returned to my seat beside Grace, while servers began moving uncertainly around the ballroom again. The wedding planner whispered, frantically into her headset near the stage while musicians quietly resumed playing soft piano near the dance floor. Around me, conversations restarted in cautious fragments. But every few moments, someone glanced toward my table. Not with pity, with curiosity, respect, even. Grace leaned closer beside me. I have never seen anyone shut down an entire ballroom with one speech before, she whispered softly. I smiled faintly. Neither have I. Across the room, Vanessa spoke rapidly with two bridesmaids while Daniel stood several feet away, staring blankly at nothing. He looked lost now, not because of the money, because for the first time in his life, someone had stopped protecting him from consequences. A server placed dessert in front of me. Lemon cake with fresh berries and edible flowers arranged carefully across white porcelain. I realized suddenly that I had barely eaten all day. The first bite tasted unexpectedly good. Maybe because I no longer felt sick with humiliation. Halfway through dessert, Daniel finally approached my table alone. His tuxedo jacket hung open now, and his tie looked slightly loosened beneath the ballroom lights. Can we talk outside? He asked quietly. Grace immediately stood. I should probably stay, I interrupted gently. Daniel looked surprised by that. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable for once. He lowered his voice. Mom, freezing the trust without warning is extreme. I set my fork down carefully. Was this morning not extreme? His face tightened immediately. I already told you Vanessa made a mistake. No, I replied calmly. She made a decision. Silence stretched between us for several long seconds while music drifted softly across the ballroom behind him. Daniel rubbed one hand across his forehead again, exactly the way he had all evening. You are humiliating us in front of everyone. I looked at him quietly for a moment. Daniel, I said softly, your wife cut my hair while I slept because she believed I would remain grateful enough to tolerate it. He opened his mouth immediately. She did not mean. Stop, I interrupted gently. Not loudly, just firmly enough that he finally fell silent. Do you know what hurts most? I asked. It is not what she did. It is the fact that your first instinct was to protect her comfort instead of my dignity. His eyes lowered instantly. Somewhere behind him, Vanessa watched us from across the ballroom, with visible fury hidden beneath her frozen smile. I almost felt sorry for Daniel then. Almost. Because standing there beneath the chandeliers in his expensive tuxedo, surrounded by flowers and candlelight purchased with my generosity, my son finally looked exactly like what he had become. A man so afraid of conflict that he surrendered his character piece by piece, without even noticing when it disappeared. 3 months after the wedding, I stood inside a small salon on a quiet street in downtown Sausalito, watching morning light spill across polished hardwood floors and silver-framed mirrors. The sign outside the front window read Moonlight Studio in delicate gold lettering. I chose the name because Arthur once called my hair Moonlight Silk before cancer took him away from me 6 years earlier. Sometimes grief leaves behind strange little gifts. The salon had originally started as an idea during sleepless nights after the wedding. Then slowly it became something real. A place for older women who wanted to feel visible again, confident again, human again. Most mornings now, the studio filled with women in their 60s and 70s drinking coffee together, while soft jazz played in the background and sunlight warmed the windows facing the bay. Women arrived carrying divorce papers, grief, loneliness, betrayal, and quiet exhaustion. They left standing a little straighter, looking at themselves differently. In many ways, I think we were all rebuilding something. Celeste worked beside me 3 days a week now. Grace handled marketing whenever she was not busy finishing graduate school in San Francisco. Life had become strangely peaceful after years of emotional tension I did not fully realize I was carrying. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. My relationship with Daniel remained complicated. We spoke occasionally now, short phone calls mostly, careful conversations that avoided the deeper truths still sitting between us. 2 weeks after the wedding, Vanessa moved out of the Seattle condo they had been renting temporarily while waiting for the penthouse purchase to close. The purchase, of course, never happened. Without access to the trust distributions, their financial situation changed quickly. Daniel admitted quietly during one of our calls that he had never fully understood how much of his lifestyle depended on the support Arthur and I continued providing behind the scenes for years. Some lessons arrived late. Vanessa sent me several messages after the wedding. At first angry, then defensive, then strangely emotional. I never answered any of them. Not because I hated her. Honestly, hatred requires more emotional energy than I was willing to spend anymore. What happened at the wedding stopped being about revenge long ago. It became about boundaries. About finally understanding that love without self-respect eventually turns into permission. Grace visited the salon often after classes and updated me on small pieces of family gossip whether I asked for them or not. Apparently, several guests from the wedding quietly distanced themselves from Vanessa afterward. Not because of the trust fund or the speech. Because once people witnessed cruelty clearly, they started remembering other moments they previously ignored. Small humiliations. Sharp comments disguised as jokes. Manipulation hidden beneath charm. That is the thing about masks. Once they crack, people cannot unsee what was underneath all along. One rainy afternoon near the end of October, the front bell above the salon door chimed softly, and Daniel stepped inside unexpectedly. He looked older somehow. Thinner. More tired around the eyes. He stood quietly near the entrance for several moments while rain tapped gently against the windows behind him. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I looked up from the appointment book in my hands. "Hello, Daniel." His eyes moved slowly around the salon before finally landing on me again. "Grace told me this place was beautiful," he admitted quietly. She was right. I thanked him politely and waited. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets like he used to do as a nervous teenager. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. A real one this time. The room felt very still around us. Outside, fog rolled slowly across the bay beyond the windows. "I kept telling myself I was protecting my marriage," he continued. "But really, I was protecting myself from conflict." I listened without interrupting. "What happened that morning should never have happened," he said quietly. "And the worst part is, I knew she was capable of hurting you before she ever did it." His voice cracked slightly on the final word. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked slowly toward him and adjusted the collar of his raincoat the same way I used to before school when he was little. Some habits remain inside a mother forever. "Daniel," I said softly, "forgiveness and access are not the same thing." Tears filled his eyes immediately because he understood exactly what I meant. I loved my son. I probably always would. But love no longer meant abandoning myself to keep someone else comfortable. After he left that afternoon, I stood alone beside the salon mirror for several quiet minutes watching rain blur softly against the windows outside. My silver hair framed my face differently now. Stronger somehow. Lighter. For the first time in years, the woman staring back at me no longer looked like someone waiting to be chosen by her own family. She looked like someone who had finally chosen herself.